Yeah. I mean, it depends on how much you want to know. I mean,
Yeah,
I think some of the best people I know that work in sport have an understanding of how it works, but they
yeah,
don't. They wouldn't be able to run it per
yeah,
se, and I
yeah,
think that's really useful still.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Okay.
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Good.
I just got to. I mean, I just wanted to quickly go back.
Sure.
I mean, I was at your talk last night, so I kind of have a rough
Yeah.
context
Sure.
that you talked about having played football when you were
Yeah. Yeah.
younger. But can you just tell me, like, just some memories of what it was like playing? Like, was it Dramana or was it?
I played. Where did I play? I did play at Drumana. I played there,
Yeah.
and I played at where else? Red Hill, yeah, Red Hill.
Yeah.
All the way down there, yeah.
Yeah.
A few clubs down there,
But
yeah.
didn't your recollection of what it was like to knowing a football club just from the level of just as a player, because it was like was it really family oriented, friends?
Yeah, I think that's a lot of people's experience. It wasn't really mine.
Yeah,
I I had a father that played
yeah,
football and played a lot and was very heavily engaged in that side of it, the
yeah,
community side.
yeah.
I was a more I didn't. I think I said last night. I didn't really start playing until I was about 14.
14. Yeah,
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 and I was okay at it. I mean, I played at the state level after that,
yeah,
but I never really took it that seriously, and
yeah,
I never really got involved in the community angle. And reason being, I was at university
yeah,
by the time I think we had a 2 year period there when I was at high school,
yeah.
to where which is a good memory, where the club was just about to fold really.
Uh-huh.
And we brought a heap of boys that lived, anywhere from 30 to minutes to an hour away,
Yeah,
and we brought them in and basically reinvigorated the under 18 team. So at that stage there wasn't one; there was about 4 players,
yeah.
um, and they hadn't won a game for about 5 years.
True.
So
This is before the
this is before, this is
players
at
came in.
Dromano actually, and we brought them in, and I'd actually forgotten about it until you mentioned that question.
Yeah.
But they haven't forgotten about it. The guy wrote about it a while ago actually,
No,
and
I mean it's part of
yeah,
the reason why I'm asking because I
yeah.
remember reading of something a little about it.
Yeah, yeah, and that was a long time ago. That's probably why I've forgotten. 20 years ago, um, but it was a really and we ended up. I think we might have. We certainly didn't make the top four. I think it was the top 4 out of 10 those days. But
Uh-huh.
we almost won as many games as we lost,
Yeah,
which is incredible after not winning any games
yeah,
for 5 years. So that was a yeah. I don't remember as well as I should, but that was a really a good time
yeah,
for the club.
yeah,
I think it meant more to the people that had been in the club
yeah,
around for a long time than it did
yeah,
to me at the time.
yeah,
But you know what these things are like when you're younger as well. Um, you don't get the importance of it as much as
yeah,
someone who's been around for 50 years does. So,
yeah,
and I mean, the classic case is here. 2016.
yeah,
Um, Certainly, every year that goes by, I probably realise how difficult it is to win one and how important it
uh-huh.
is. But then you see the people that are in their 70s, 80s, 90s,
Yeah,
particularly 90s. And yeah, you see just how valuable it is for them because they've been waiting their whole life.
yeah.
Yeah,
Does it still come up in? Do people still talk about it? I haven't been involved with the club, so
sure.
like, I mean, I walked in and the grand finals playing on the television, and
Oh, was it?
yeah,
Yeah.
just in there, and
Okay, it doesn't normally happen. I mean,
yeah,
it's
like I said,
certainly, it's not a particularly healthy thing to kind of live off the back of
yeah,
moving forward because, you need to enjoy it, and we certainly did that.
yeah,
And I think the club made sure that
yeah,
it moved on from too quickly because it was such a long time since there'd been one.
yeah,
But there's a lot of paraphernalia on the walk
yeah.
through
I
actually
had a little bit.
in the actually through the other area into the players area,
Oh, right.
which is interesting how long they'll leave that there for as well.
Yeah,
Because every time you walk in, you're walking, um, you are walking through the success of the club, but you're also walking past approximately 8 to 10 players that aren't playing at the club anymore, either
yeah,
through retiring or going elsewhere. So
yeah,
it'd be interesting to see whether that's still there next year or the
yeah,
year after. We probably take that down and move it
yeah,
somewhere else. It's
yeah,
something you want to remember, but you don't
yeah,
want it to be hanging over your head either.
yeah.
Yeah,
With data science, I mean, you studied sports science, was
I
it?
did. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Why did you like? Why that and not?
Well, a bit of serendipity, but a little bit of foresight, I'd like to
Yeah,
think as well. So,
yeah,
uh, so I was in biomechanics and
uh-huh.
performance analysis for my PhD. So
Yeah,
they're certainly not like physics, like some of the people that were there last night, but
yeah,
quantitatively heavy, more comparatively speaking, to sports science.
yeah,
Um, and at the time, yeah, I saw a gap that, and I wasn't really aware it was going on in the US, but I
yeah,
saw a gap in imagine what could happen, and also, machine learning was becoming a thing. It
Yeah.
wasn't really at the time. I didn't realise it was around before that. I mean, there's actually quite a lot of machine learning stuff dating back to the 80s and the 90s,
Yeah.
but at that stage it wasn't really popularised. So I took a bit of a punt and thought I'd move in that direction, and it was a very, very good move. But
Yeah.
serendipity. I'd like to think I had a bit of foresight, but it was really just seeing a gap. But other people have seen gaps before and they
Yeah.
haven't eventuated. So this
Well,
was a good one.
when you say seeing a gap, was it just in terms of the background? Like, what do you
Seeing a gap with respect to what the industry needed.
Yeah.
I've never really focused on the type of science that you would expect where we were last night, the hard
Yeah.
science, so to speak. It's always been applied.
Yeah.
And you probably got a bit of a insight into that last night.
Yeah.
It's very much what's a problem that the industry is facing,
Yeah.
and can we solve it?
Yeah.
And so, when I talk about gap, I'm talking about a gap in practice. So I had very good training from my PhD supervisor, who was a mathematics background.
Yeah.
But again, he was in biomechanics.
Yeah.
But he was also very rigorous. So it wasn't just around, which they tend to go hand in hand.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just the numbers per se. It was also taking questioning everything, being very sceptical, validity, reliability of data that we're capturing, and so that kind of really had a massive influence on the type of things I brought to the table. So it's certainly I saw a lot of poor decisions being made in organisations, a lot of things made off subjective judgments, which can sometimes be good, but when I say there's a gap for things to be done in a better way, and I had some really good wins with that in certain sports, golf being the main one early days. But then as time moved on, it's continued to be a real positive, but at the same time it can be a bit of a curse because and I think I might have mentioned this last night as well, it's not always fun being the skeptic in the room or the person that's calling out things to bad practice or things like that.
Yeah.
So I'm fairly particularly around here because I've been here for 5 years now.
Yeah.
I'm selective about when I choose to kind of vocalise certain things that I think we could do better.
Yeah. So, you started here the same time that I read somewhere that Luke did.
Yeah, the first week. Yeah.
Oh right.
Yeah. I think I beat him by a day.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. No, well, I was appointed before him. Not by the previous coach though, but by the administration, which left pretty recently after that. So Simon Garlick was the CEO at that point. There's been a few since.
Yeah.
Quite a few. But it was the same week as Luke. Yeah.
Yeah. I've read somewhere that you said that that around the premiership. I mean, you've said that it was a highlight, like for a lot of people, imagine. And I've read somewhere that you said that everyone kind of had to do their role as part of the kind of sports science team or the diet science. I mean, what kind of role did you have to perform, like to fit in with the broader team?
It's changed quite dramatically. So a bit of context is needed for that.
Yeah.
So in 15 was a big year for us around, from our perspective in sports science and sports analytics, around doing a lot of things, and we probably learn lessons now around trying not to do too much, trying to pick off one or two big things a year. But we would come in, there wasn't a big department here at all, so we wanted to do everything. But we, at the same time, there were one or two things that we did that we felt like had an influence, and certainly, the word I use is audit, but we audited our training. I talked about it a little bit last night around providing those regular insights. So I spent quite a lot of time with Luke that year. Probably every Tuesday morning we, ad hoc spent an hour or two talking about methodological things, which is great at the time. It was what we needed. So things like how long should a training drill go for, and how would we know when the quality is dropping off, or when we should change it when the players are getting bored, which is a very basic kind of question. But then by adding an analytical framework behind that, it can become, we can actually test that empirically. We can actually put some data behind that. So one of the main ones was and I think Damien mentioned it last night, is training how you play. There's mixed evidence on whether that actually helps. You would think that it's the most obvious thing of all time, that if you train like you play, you're going to get better. But it's not as conclusive as you might think. But certainly there's enough evidence to suggest that we should have trained a bit more like we played. And we started to do a little bit more of that. And at least when we weren't, we knew when we were and when we weren't. So even that information is of use.
Yeah.
So as far as playing a role, yeah, I mean, it's changed because at that stage I was heavily involved in those type of things.
Yeah.
16, my colleague left, so I went from just working with the coaches to having to oversee the whole lot of, the physical preparation, the nutrition, the GPS. 17, we had an experiment with me coaching, so I coached that year. 18, I started working with Director of Football more on innovation. And now I'm continuing to do that, but again, I've probably stepped back from the entire club as far as feet on the ground. I'm probably here no more than 5 to 10 hours a week. But yeah, again, high level discussion. So, for example, what should the facility look like in 10 years? What involvement should we have with the new Footscray Hospital when it's finished? Those types of things. Yeah.
You probably get asked this a lot, but just in general, when I watch football, you see the players on the ground, you see the coaches in the box. What's it like when you were involved with the team a bit more closely, like at like game level? What's it? Where were you situated in that whole thing for you and your
that year I coached, I was on the bench.
You were on the bench?
I was on the bench, yeah. So I was speaking directly to Luke.
Yeah.
And there were other lines going down as well. So one of our assistant coaches spoke directly to our runner, I believe.
Yeah.
So that was the two lines of communication. The idea behind that was that it might be an opportunity to use my skill sets in that environment.
Yeah.
And there's things that went well and things that probably didn't go as well. But I think the idea is to instill some objectivity. And again, that's still not perfect either, because I'm still a human. I'm still going to be fallible to subjective and biases, or my own biases. But the idea is that some more objective data that we could use. So our approach to that now would be more, it's less important that a person's doing that role, and more important that the people in those roles or in positions have access to data and meaningful data in a way that they can use very quickly. And that's become actually the method behind it's become a research interest of mine in many ways. So, and there's two main parts of it. One is what we call decisional guidance. So how can framing a problem in a different way change the interpretation of the user, so using the same data? And then obviously how the visualizations can change it as well. So how can colour alone allow for someone to not have to interpret numbers but make a decision very quickly? Because these guys, they do have time to make a decision, but they're doing other things at the same time. So colour, font, all these things, how are they able to make decision makers' life easier? So very much removed from what you'd normally see in sports science. It's much more cognitive science, psychophysics, psychology, all those areas. Yeah.
How does how does the psychological side, the cognitive side of things kind of phase into it now? You talked last night briefly, you kind of hinted at the idea that with the way that the funding is looking to increase and the question about whether sports is becoming sports entertainment, I'm really interested in this idea that, the stakes are growing in general for sport, and now what does that mean for the player development, given that everyone has a bigger stake now in success? I think I think you've written somewhere talking about, you studied about skills measuring and the way that had become more consistent, but elements around the idea of the less tangible aspects, or I know you hinted at it last night as well, that you yourself or Damien maybe talked about, somebody asked about motivation, for example, and I know in one of your slides you talked about, sorry I'm talking a lot, but you talked about at the moment one of the ways is user generated review, but is there a transition taking place where that can be mediated by other data systems? Or?
I think we didn't talk about that if we had more time I would have last night, but I think that's a way forward. I think the question, and this is, I'm starting. I have written in the past, and I'm starting to write more on decision support systems for sport and how they set them up. And if we talk about, I think I gave an example last night of a talent identification or a talent detection system as a decision support system. One of the hallmarks of the ways that we evaluate a decision support system will be based on not it's just performance full stop, but it's performance relative to what's in place now around a benchmark. So we talk about an item like motivation. If we are evaluating motivation of an athlete right now in such a poor way that it's really almost not worth having, for example, then even a relatively new technology that's providing at least some insights into motivation, whether it's through facial features like Damien was showing, you could make an argument that as of right now in 2019, maybe that's still better than nothing. Even though we go into it with our eyes open, that hey, it's maybe only a proxy for motivation. Maybe we need to improve the methodology a little bit better. But what tends to happen a lot in sport is if you bring up a new measure like that, for example, if we use something around the facial recognition and facial emotion tracking for motivation now, it would be met with quite a lot of skepticism by the industry, which is interesting because they may trust their own subjective judgments over and above that new measure. So it's almost like, even though you may have an incremental advancement by a new piece of technology beating the human system out, in my experience, it needs to beat it by quite a wide margin before it will get acceptance.
It's like adopted by...
Yeah. So that's and we're doing we've got a paper and review at the moment on this, which I'm quite interested in, but it's not our idea. We took it from a guy called Luca Pappalardo in Italy, and what he did was he compared the ratings of Italian football scouts. Out of 10, they rated every player in a season out of 10 for every game, and we compared that with the ratings that would be generated by a model using data. And we found what he found, which was, for example, a striker in football, their rating is almost exclusively given by a human. Their rating is almost exclusively down to whether they scored a goal or not.
Yeah.
So you have all these quantitative measures out there, and tackles and goals and running, and the reality is it all comes down to one metric.
Yeah.
So is that because that metric's important, or is it because the human is not able to process the other pieces of information in their judgment, or they bias towards that measure? So it's an interesting area, and it's coming to a head more and more. And I used to give a lot of talks about objective versus subjective, or human versus machine. And now I've changed. I gave one in London last year, and it was the first time I talked about them working together as a hybrid, because I found I wasn't getting a lot of good responses from people in the industry around that. So it's more now what I said to you earlier. If there's a feasible, reasonably valid, reliable system out there, or metric that's objective, and you can clearly show it's going to outperform the human, I think we should adopt it. But in motivation, coming back to the not sure we're there yet. But I think we're going to be going that way. I mean, you saw, I think, sentiment analysis and through audio and vision through emotion tracking, these things will give us something in the future.
There's a lot of what I saw last night and I've seen is around this idea of technology. I mean, last night I remember thinking to myself, this idea that almost this data science was enabling a kind of higher level of self-awareness for athletes or for coaching or for teams. But I've heard you talk a lot about this idea of the need for data to engage with that human element. What is the human element these days? Like, at a basic level, is it just... I think I've kind of drawn out the question a bit. I guess I'm just curious to you, when you talk about the need for the human communication to remain central, or not to remain central, but does it need to remain central? Like, thinking about coaches and data, and I think I confused myself.
No, I mean, I think it doesn't need it certainly doesn't need to remain central, and
Yeah.
it'd be a hell of a lot better if it didn't.
Yeah.
But, I'm a realist as well.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think we're not going to be throwing the humans out anytime soon in sport. And many would argue that we don't want to. I mean, will people watch it anymore? And so that's when I talked last night around, and I've probably learned lessons over the years when I talk about sport being an industry and an entertainment business. And that's part of my experience reflected in the way I talk about that, because I've spoken at hundreds of events over the years, and some of them haven't been performance and a performance audience, like last night, for example. And so you find yourself, if I'm talking to people in business or in economics, they're actually not even remotely interested in the performance element. They want to know about how this might make them more money, or how it might improve the fan experience. So, yeah, I think those things would all suffer substantially if we took the humans out of it, because that's what sells. And I think the AFL understand that really well. I mean, I think they've recognised that a bad story is better than no story at all. And that's why, if you go to the AFL website at any given time, you'll see there's the good, the bad, and anything to do with AFL will be on there. And that's definitely intentional, and it's clever. In fact, that you could say they're almost hypersensitive to any of the 365 days of the year not having AFL in the news. It's kind of very difficult to get away from it in Melbourne, as you probably know.
Are you? Are there any areas within looking at the outlook of where things are going? Is there any areas that are morally questionable, or things that need to be there's often a kind of like in computer science they talk about the need to think about ethical questions as they learn to new technologies. Is there a similar discussion or a need for a discussion in your mind?
There's a need for discussion. There's not a similar discussion. I think given with a bit of perspective, given where sport fits compared to everything else, if we're worrying about it in sport and not elsewhere, I think we're probably jumping ahead a little bit. But sport being so pervasive and the players or the player unions in particular being very hypersensitive, you probably will hear about it in sport before you hear about it in other domains where it's more important. And we're already seeing that now. I mean, the NBL, for example, have decided not to do player tracking moving forward. A certain player who was very influential in kind of pushing players to not do that, who's now gone to another team overseas. You probably work out who I'm talking about. So now the reason, the rationale behind that is because he may have felt like in the US there was that data may have been used against players.
In terms of contracts? Or?
In terms of contracts, and maybe, and he may be quite right in the sense that certain clubs may not have an understanding about what that means. I would almost never see any reason in team sport for GPS or tracking data be used for a performance perspective. I think I said that last night. The game is variable. The game dictates what you do. You don't dictate what the game does. So I think that's sometimes lost. So I'd agree with that, but the argument for the NBL is that it provides fan engagement, it provides broadcast information, so it's probably a very selfish, narrow view that person might have, which is affecting, without them even knowing, affecting all the hundreds of other players that are playing around Australia.
Has that come up in the AFL? Has it kind of come up and then kind of gone away at all in the recent history?
It's come up at times, but I think through a bit of common sense and through conversations between the right stakeholder groups, if it had ever come up, I think it would have been a reality check would have been given back to the players union specifically pretty quickly, because the reality is we've seen it in the NBA. The more access you give, the more money that's going to be coming. And I mentioned it last night. I mean, we and I'm sure the AFL don't, as an example, and any other decent league don't expect that the TV rights and broadcast deals aren't going to keep getting bigger for nothing. They need to play games when they want them to be played. They need to provide new and better insights, whatever that might be. And so, certainly tracking data in the AFL is part of that story, no question. And they're using it already, but they're using it in a really light way, obviously, at the moment. But the AFL are constantly have an eye on the NBA and NFL. I think there's no secret there.
What would you introduce? Like, are there? I mean, I think I've heard you talk about GPS, for example, is certain forms of data is being quite limited, or there's certain kind of very limited framing around where they're useful. What kind of things do you think would be useful to study or to track going forward?
In a game?
I mean, maybe stuff that you can talk about. That really.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
In a game, do you mean? Or,
yeah.
Oh, I think it depends on the end user again. I mean, player tracking is still. I won't talk about it specifically, not because I can't talk about it, just because it's probably overly detailed for this conversation. But the metrics and the ways that data can be framed and analysed, particularly the continuous tracing data, is incredibly valuable. But as you said, the way it's framed now, or maybe the way it's analysed now, is a little bit less so. So there's still a really healthy future for that. We've seen that in the NBA, we've seen it in European soccer. With the way that they've developed some really nice metrics, some nice visualisations. So things that can be used for fan engagement as well as actual insights on the value of a player. But really, in a nutshell, whether it's heart rate data or tracking data or anything else, or a motion tracker when having a shot for goal, like Damien showed, anything like that. At the heart of it all, what sells to the coaches, to the players, to the fans, or the broadcasters is a simple word. It's prediction. People want that's what people want to hear, and they want to see a prediction. They want to say this player is 40% likely to kick the goal from there, or 70% likely to kick the goal from there. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's humans enjoy that challenge. When it's wrong, they like to challenge themselves against the recommendation and wonder why they got it right and why the recommendation got it wrong. They might want to look at it saying, criticising or praising the player because there's a reference point, there's a benchmark for them. We didn't mention it last night, but it's very, very valuable to the leagues from a wagering perspective as well. I'm not aware of those wagering markets existing right now about live betting on shots at goal, but it's only a matter of time. So the reality is, prediction is, and it has always been the buzzword, whatever that means. I mean, there are different definitions of it, but I'm talking about obtaining insight about something that's going to happen in the near future that gives you a competitive advantage over someone else. So it's all about that. When we come back to tracking data, the way it's used now, it's not really capable of being used in that sense. There needs to be a live feed coming in.
Which is, I mean, there's a lot of variables. I know you've said about something like this. I mean, the NBA is, which I think you've talked about as well, being kind of a small, less players on the court, smaller venue, etc. The discussion around the NBA at the moment, maybe I'll try to tie it all to close it up, but is around this idea that there's almost a kind, as a lay person looking at it, is a kind of identity crisis because the analytics has come in, well, that's what they call it, they put the portion of blame and said this is what works and this is actually, 3-pointers, high percentage, everything else is detrimental to that. And they're trying to see if there's an accurate enough correlation between that and actually the way teams play, and there are a lot of teams playing in a more kind of similar way. Do you think there's ever a risk of that with AFL, or is that just by nature of it being so variable and
I don't think for one moment that the NBA's reached the pinnacle either. And so when I talk about being passionate about machine learning, it's because it's inherently linked to sport in the sense that non-linearity, dynamic, all those things that we associate with machine learning are associated with sport. So I don't for one minute think that and I think we've got evidence all over the place that there's one or two or even three ways to win a basketball match. There's still, and Damien showed a good example last night with the tennis racket combinations, and it's the same thing. there's still millions of degrees of freedom that can be tinkered with in a game of basketball.
Yeah.
And that's some of the work that I'm doing now with NBA, with an NBA team around, around the stints, for example. Who should be on the court at any one time, for how long, with which players. Is it depending on the time of the game, the context, the score, who you're playing? I mean, there's so many degrees of freedom, and in many ways it's intractable because you never have enough data to build a meaningful model. So it's much more around simulation, and I don't particularly am a huge fan of simulation full stop anyway, because of many reasons. But the reality is, it's will it swing away from the 3-point game at some point in time? Absolutely, it will.
Probably.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, that's objectively what the analysis is saying. But you'll find, again, even just simply changing the dependent variable can completely change the question. So 3-pointers might be I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but 3-point attempts might be related to points scored, but it may also be negatively correlated with points against. Or are they comparing against just wins and losses? Does it work well for some teams? Does it work not well against others? So what's the implication of game style? I know that the speed of ball movement is another one that's increasingly becoming important to NBA teams. So some of the slower ball movement teams are the ones that you would expect to be slow, which is Golden State and Houston, who are probably the two best teams in it.
Yeah.
Because they do what they want.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah. As a fan, it's really interesting to hear, because you often hear discussions about why does a coach use this combination of players, and there's often a thing of like, why do they? Like, how do they decide when to pull or put someone on? And even if it sometimes, maybe I'm getting into fan territory here, thinking about it, but this idea of combinations is a really interesting.
It's a combination of coach heuristics with data, certainly. So for example, a coach may have a perception that a player can't go for more than 7 minutes stint.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there may or may not be evidence to support that. If they're a good organisation, what they would be doing would be saying, well, let's check that out.
Mm-hmm.
What happens to this player? Well, actually, his differential on points, his scoring rate drops down, but funnily enough, maybe the team's scoring rate lifts with him still on the court.
Yeah.
What happens to his running? We talked about the issue with looking at running with it changing the game.
Mm-hmm.
So anything underlying those decisions, there's obviously multiple dependent variables that people want to know about.
Yeah.
So if a coach has an opinion like that, and it shows, and the evidence starts to stack up around, okay, he scores less, he defends worse, the team has a negative point differential, and he runs less. Okay, maybe we're starting to get somewhere here. Maybe the coach's eye is being validated. But the interesting thing about basketball, it's the same in AFL, the same in any sport. But even more so important in basketball, because there's only 5 players on the court, is him being on the court or him being off the court has a very direct relationship with one other player or 2 other players on the team. So if your centre, if your wing has to come off after every 7 minutes, that means another wing's got to come on and play somewhere. So it's an optimisation problem, and it can't ever be looked at as one player in isolation. So, but it's almost intractable as a problem.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Last few questions, they're quick ones. What role does intuition play for you? Like, sometimes you've talked about questions and need to ask the right questions. Sometimes if you're looking at the data, maybe it's difficult. What?
Well, to me, it plays no role.
Yeah.
I don't subscribe to it, but I don't know how much you've read in the intuition space, but the two schools of thought. The person I would read, if you're interested in more about that, is Gerd Gigerenzer. Gigerenzer.
All right.
Now he's he's written a lot on intuition.
Yeah.
Now, incredibly smart guy. Some of his stuff I think is extremely speculative and no evidence behind it. Others is extremely compelling. So, yeah, I'd certainly say have a read of.
Okay. Second last, do you ever still get into, like, I mean, watching Moneyball and these kind of depictions of the role of analytics, and
Yeah.
you talk about the book, but I'm talking about the film, I guess. Is there ever a component where it is just watching video? I mean, or does it relate to this idea of intuition, where ultimately, again, it's putting too much emphasis on the human observe? Like that film and that story seems to put a weight on a few individuals,
Yeah.
kind of being the axis on which those better decisions are made when it's really just data.
The reality is, I think the two can combine really nicely. I think
Yeah.
if you've got a perception or if there's a perception from anyone that a person has good intuition and they're an experienced coach and they make good decisions, it's still very quantifiable. You just simply observe those decisions and record them longitudinally and find out whether they are above average or above a model's performance. So it's quite easy to do. It doesn't happen very often, or it's not reported very often. I'm sure it happens in organisations, but it's not the type of information you're going to see out in the general public for obvious reasons. If the coach ends up not being as good a decision maker as you might have thought, it's probably not a great story for them to get out. But again, there's still a number of biases that can come. Even if it's not a bias for a certain player or a certain type of decision, there's recency bias, for example, or there's a number of different ones that will come up. So I'd have to go back and look at which author to look up on this. But certainly there's evidence around, not in sport but in other domains, assertive, rapid decision makers being considered as better decision makers. So if I sound like I know what I'm talking about and I make a decision quickly and rapidly, and we see that in sport a lot.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
May not be true though.
Yeah. Last question. What's it like, for example, thinking about AFL, watching the game without data? Is it once you go into the realm of data, is it possible to even to think about watch the game without it?
Yeah, I don't.
What's it like?
I don't think I really. I segregate them quite well. I think other people don't, but I don't. I'm not even. I wouldn't say I'm even a sports fan so much anymore. I'm more interested in the problems because I'm academic at heart, so I'm interested in the problems, and I think I talked about that last night today as well.
Yeah.
So to me, if we talk about comparing why a human makes a decision as opposed to a model, and what are the mechanisms behind that, I find that more interesting than the sport itself. So if basketball gives me a different way to approach that problem to AFL, to cricket, or whatever it is, then so be it.
Yeah.
But and I'm probably being a little bit flippant now. I mean, I don't think I'd enjoy it as much if I went and did it in a different industry that I know nothing about. I think sport has a nice. I think sport is a really good vehicle for looking at a problem like that because they're all just a little bit different. Even team sports, they're all played on a court or a field with players, but they've all got certain intricacies and certain cultural things that make them unique. Yeah. So it's there's always work to be done as well. Because something that you do in Australian football may not transfer to another sport. So even though last night I spoke about, it's great when you do a project in one sport and you can pick it up and move it into other sports. Sometimes it needs to be tinkered with a little bit before you do that.
Okay. Great. Maybe I'll just wrap it up. I'm sure you've got other things to do.
No, that's fine. I'm probably going to get out of the main thing I've got to do now is get over the ground. We've got some functions tonight. But,
okay.
Yeah, do you follow the football at all?
I do.
Or mainly basketball now?
No, I just more basketball now than
You have a team?
in basketball?
Yeah.
Probably OKC. But yeah. Do you ever have a fondness for any teams?
I do. The one I work with at the moment, funnily enough, I enjoyed work. I followed kind of growing up. Apart from when I was really young, I followed Phoenix because of Barkley, really. But no, it's so I'm probably over there every kind of quarter of the year. It's a very captivating kind of sport being on. It's something that's very foreign to us here, isn't it? Because it's on every day.
Yeah.
I think the AFL would do that if they could. But, I mean, they're already sneaking in there now with a Thursday night.
Yeah.
Which is, I think that's only a matter of time before that's normal. Yeah, it'll be. Obviously, they tried Monday a few years ago, but I think it'll be Thursday for Sunday for sure.
Yeah.
And there's enough fixtures now for it to go around. So no, it's good, and it's a pointy end now, of course. And OKC ended up with Portland today.
Yeah.
Which I think they almost always beat them, don't they?
Yeah.
They've got a good record against them. So.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're probably all just wasting our time apart from one team. But anyway, hopefully that's not the case this year.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
All right.
Great. Well,
Thanks so much.
no problem. Hopefully, got what's of interest and what you need. And,
Yeah. Thanks.